That night, when Jesus was arrested, it wasn't just betrayal, it wasn't just fear, there was something else, a strange detail that many people miss when they read the Bible. A young man was there, right in the middle of the chaos, watching as they took Jesus away. But suddenly, everything changed. Fear took over him. He ran, desperately trying to escape. And in the middle of that escape, something unexpected happened. The soldiers tried to grab him, but he pulled away, leaving his garment behind, and he ran completely naked into the darkness of the night. Why would the Bible include such a strange detail? Who was that young man, really? And what was God trying to show us in that moment? Today, we're going to find out. Night had fallen over Jerusalem. The air was cold, and the silence in the Garden of Gethsemane felt heavy, as if time itself was holding its breath. Among the olive trees, Jesus was on his knees, alone, praying. But this was no ordinary prayer. His voice trembled. His body was under such deep pressure that his sweat fell like drops of blood onto the ground. He knew what was coming, that in just a few hours he would be betrayed, judged, crucified. And still, he didn't run. He stayed. Meanwhile, in the distance, a light began to break through the darkness. Torches, many of them. The sound of footsteps, metal, voices drawing near. The moment had come. The crowd entered the garden like a storm. Soldiers, temple guards, armed men, and leading them, Judas, one of the 12. And then, he did it. A kiss, a signal, a betrayal. In that instant, everything erupted into chaos. The disciples reacted. Fear hit them all at once. Peter drew his sword. The blade flashed under the torchlight. A sudden move, an attack, a man wounded, shouts, confusion. But in the middle of all that, Jesus did not step back. He stood firm. And it was right in that moment that something else happened. Something small, something that seemed insignificant, but was written down forever. In the middle of the chaos, while everyone was reacting, while fear was starting to take over, there was someone else there. A young man. He wasn't one of the 12. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't part of the crowd. He was watching, following Jesus from a distance, as if something inside him was pulling him closer, but at the same time, he didn't have the courage to fully step in. The Gospel of Mark mentions him in just a few lines. No name, no story, no explanation. But what it says is striking. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. Mark 14:51-52. Such a short scene, and yet so unsettling. A young man, barely covered with a linen cloth, a light, improvised covering, as if he had rushed out of his house, as if he had heard something and wanted to see what was happening. Maybe he didn't fully understand who Jesus was, or maybe he did, but only from a distance. Maybe he had heard his words, seen something in him, but wasn't ready to truly follow. And then, in the middle of the arrest, when the soldiers began to take control, someone noticed him. Maybe they thought he was a follower. Maybe they assumed he should be arrested too. And in a matter of seconds, they tried to grab him. The young man froze for a moment. Fear took over completely. He didn't think. He didn't reason. He just reacted. He pulled away, and he ran. But in that desperate attempt to escape, the cloth stayed behind, and in that moment, he was completely exposed, with nothing, no protection, no control, no way to cover what was happening. And so, he ran like someone trying to disappear, like someone who didn't want to be seen, like someone who just wanted to survive, leaving behind not just a piece of cloth, but any attempt to remain. And he fled, vanishing into the darkness of the night, And just like that, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. No name, no explanation, only leaving behind a scene that feels strange, but is deeply meaningful. And just like that, the scene ended. The young man disappeared into the darkness, and the story moved on without him. Jesus was arrested. The disciples ran away. The night continued, but that detail was written down, and for centuries it has puzzled those who read it carefully. Because in the middle of one of the most important moments in the entire Bible, when the Son of God was being handed over, when everything was leading to the cross, a character appeared with no name, and for just a moment was recorded forever. Why? Why would the Gospel of Mark include something like this? It wasn't necessary to understand the arrest. It didn't change the outcome. It didn't affect the main story. And yet it was included, as if God himself wanted us to notice it, as if in the middle of the chaos, there was something we were meant to see. Because the Bible doesn't include details by accident. Every word, every scene, every person has a purpose. And this moment, as brief as it is, was not a mistake. It was intentional. It was placed there to catch our attention, to unsettle us, to make us ask questions. Who was that young man? Why was he there? And why did he run like that? But there's something even more unsettling. It's not just what he did. It's what it represents. Because in that scene, we didn't just see a young man running away. We saw something deeper. Something that, if we're honest, and we've done too, and so the question remained in the air. Who was that young man? Because Mark never told us his name. He never explained where he came from. He never mentioned him again. He allowed him to enter the scene for a moment and then disappear into the darkness. And that's what made many people throughout the centuries stop and wonder, trying to understand who that young man really was, the one who followed Jesus on the night of his arrest and ended up fleeing naked. One of the most well-known theories is that this young man was actually Mark himself, John Mark, the author of the Gospel. Because there's something interesting. No one else mentions this moment. Not Matthew, not Luke, not John. Only Mark includes it. And he does it with a very specific detail, almost as if he were remembering something you don't easily forget, as if that scene had been burned into his memory. That's why some believe Mark was there that night, not as one of the main disciples, but as a young witness, curious, attentive. Someone who, after hearing what was happening in Gethsemane, ran out to see it for himself. And that would explain the linen cloth, because it wasn't the clothing of someone prepared to go out. It was what someone would wear if they had rushed out, with no time, no preparation, like someone who wakes up suddenly and runs toward the scene. It fits. A young man, a light cloth, a rushed exit, a reaction driven by fear. And for many, everything seemed to make sense. Mark would have been there. He would have seen the arrest. He would have been discovered. He would have escaped however he could. And years later, when he wrote his gospel, he may have left that detail there as a quiet trace of himself. Not to make himself the focus, but as a humble confession. I was there. I saw that night. And I was afraid. But the Bible never says that directly. It's a possibility, not a certainty. And because of that, another interpretation began to grow, that the young man was not someone well known, but an anonymous follower, not a recognized figure, just someone ordinary who wanted to get close to Jesus, but couldn't remain, someone who had heard his teachings, who felt drawn to him, maybe even admired him, but didn't yet have the strength to stay when things became difficult. And that fits too. Because around Jesus there weren't just the 12. There were many others, men and women who followed him, who listened, who watched. And among them, there could have been young people, a young man who wanted to see what was happening, who chose to follow from a distance. But when the danger became real and when the soldiers came closer, when he realized that this was not just another night, he panicked. And then he did what fear often does to the human heart. It pushed him to run. And at that point, the detail of the linen cloth begins to carry even more meaning. Because it wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was the only thing covering him, his only visible protection. And even that, when the moment of crisis came, he couldn't hold on to it. He let it go. He left it behind. And in that moment, his escape became completely exposed. No covering, no defense, no control, completely vulnerable. And suddenly, the scene stops being just curious and becomes deeply human, because that young man didn't just run from danger. He ran, overcome by fear. And that's why many began to see in him something more than an identity. They saw a reflection, because the real question is no longer just who he was, but why this moment was written down. Why this detail? Why this kind of escape? And the more you think about it, the clearer something becomes. The text doesn't give him a name, because it doesn't want us to only look at him. It wants us to see ourselves in him, because without a name, he can represent anyone. Anyone who wanted to follow Jesus, but only from a distance. Anyone who felt something, but not enough to stay. Anyone who, when fear showed up, chose to run. And so, that young man stopped being just a mystery and became a mirror. Because when the text stops focusing on his identity and begins to reveal his meaning, the entire scene changes. It's no longer just the story of someone who ran away. It's the revelation of what fear can do when it reaches the human heart. Because that young man did not plan to run. He didn't go to Gethsemane with the intention of escaping. He went to see, to get closer, to be there. But when things became real, when the risk appeared, when following Jesus stopped being safe, everything changed. And that's what makes this scene so powerful, because it shows that not everyone who is close is ready to remain. And so, the scene stopped being just a mystery and started becoming a mirror, because that young man represents what happens in the human heart when following Jesus stops being comfortable, when there are no more crowds, when there are no visible miracles, when there's no emotion holding your faith together, only pressure, risk, cost. And that's when many people do the same thing. They get close, but from a distance. They watch, but without fully committing. They follow, but with conditions, until a moment comes when everything becomes difficult, when following Jesus means losing something, when being identified with him starts to cost you. And then, fear shows up. And without even realizing it, they begin to let go. Convictions, decisions, things that once felt firm, until, like that young man, they end up running. Not always physically, but in the heart. Running from what God asked. Running from what they knew was right. Running from the commitment, and many times that they don't even realize what they left behind. Because in that scene, that young man didn't just leave a cloth, he left his place, he left his chance to remain. He left the moment. And that's what fear does. It makes you lose more than you think. It makes you step back, right when it was time to stay. But there's something that makes this scene even more powerful. Because while that young man was running, Jesus wasn't. Jesus also felt the weight. Jesus also saw what was coming. But he stayed. He stood firm. He didn't run from the cross. He didn't let go of his purpose. He didn't step back in fear. And that contrast changes everything. Because while the human heart fails, he remains. While we let go, he holds on. While we run, he gives himself. And because of that, the story doesn't end in the escape. Because even when someone has run, when they've let go, when fear has taken over, there is still a way back. Because the same Jesus who was arrested that night is still calling, not the perfect, not the ones who never failed, but those who at some point also ran. And maybe this was the strongest contrast in the entire scene. A young man running through the darkness, trying to escape, leaving everything behind, and a savior walking through that same night, without running, without stepping back, without giving up. One overcome by fear, the other sustained by love. One running to save himself, the other surrendering himself to save everyone. And in that contrast, something was revealed that changes everything. But the story didn't end there. It continued to the cross. And it wasn't because Jesus couldn't escape. It was because he chose to stay. Because if he had run, there would be no hope. If he had let go, there would be no forgiveness. If he had stepped back, there would be no salvation. But he didn't. He stood firm to the very end. And that changes everything. Because even if, at some point, many of us have been like that young man, even if we've been afraid, even if we've run, even if we've let go of what once felt firm, Jesus didn't walk away. He didn't change his mind. He didn't say, "It's not worth it anymore." Instead, he kept going. He kept walking, all the way to the cross, thinking of us. And that means something deeply beautiful, because the story of humanity is often marked by running away, but the story of Christ is marked by staying. And because of that, running away doesn't have the final word. Fear doesn't have the final word. Shame doesn't have the final word. Because at the cross, God made a way to come back, a way to remain, a way to begin again. If this story spoke to your heart today, if at any point you felt that, like that young man, you've wanted to run, write this in the comments. Lord, help me remain in your presence. And if this video helped you discover a detail in the Bible you may have never noticed before, subscribe to the channel, because here we keep exploring the deepest, most powerful, and often overlooked stories in God's Word. And if you want to go deeper, I invite you to watch the other videos on the channel where we're discovering together the most powerful, most revealing, and most life-changing moments in the Bible. Because every story has something to say to you. You can also share this video with someone who needs to remember that even if they've failed, even if they've been afraid, even if they've let go, there is still hope. And before you go, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to read you and see how far this message is reaching. Until next time, may the peace and light of God be with you always.